lovely to have you today on the African PhD Scholars Network. I have with me Dr. Kingley Udofa, and we'll be having a conversation. Welcome, Dr. Kingley. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. And yourself?
I'm great. I'm wonderful. It's a pleasure to be here with you. We've had, some really good times on our program. We've had talks about, understand the PhD journey, exploring PhD, JAPA series, which we're going to do again, But I thought today, it's good that we talk. I don't think we preserve some of our stories enough. So I'm trying to get us to start talking and to preserve our stories. So I want to start with you. Now, let's start. Just could you introduce yourself and then we'll begin your name, what you do, and then we'll start from there. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. It's an honor to be here with you. And obviously, thank you for all the work that you're doing for African PhD scholars. It was just a few months ago that we met up for that event. I thought it was a fantastic opportunity. Okay, so who am I? What's my name? My name is Kingley Udofa. You rightly introduced me. I currently teach or lecture at Sheffield Hallam University, where I am module lead on two modules, sports law and the law of torts. In addition to that, I've done some work outside Sheffield Uni. So I do some consulting as well, especially in regards to judicial reform and stuff like that. So that's me currently.
Nice. Thank you. Thank you for that. And we'll come to talk law. Okay. Now, let's talk about your PhD journey. Walk me through, because you're a lawyer, right?
I am, yes.
Yes. So, and you studied in Nigeria. So walk me through that process of how you started to think about your PhD and your thought process, some of the things that went through your mind and how you ended up at, where did you do your PhD? Was it at
University of Sheffield?
Oh, amazing. Okay, so please talk me through that and let's go from there.
Yeah, I think it's never the beginning of the conversation to start off with the PhD. It's always good to go a few steps back so you understand, how the PhD has come about. Obviously, I studied law back in Nigeria. I went to University of Jos. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it. And that's where I had my law degree, my LLB, my undergrad degree. And then after that, I went on to the law school in Enugu, served the usual thing, and then went back to practice law in Jos. And I practiced law for a year. And all throughout my practice year, I should say, I always thought that eventually I would try and get into the bench. We use bench to refer to judges to become a judge. And I think I always wanted to go to the bench because I wasn't very keen on the adversarial nature of legal practice. Obviously, if you're a lawyer in Nigeria, if you know anything about this, you're always adversarial, you're always into fights with people, you represent clients. Yeah, you represent clients who want to go to court all the time, they don't want to settle. So that sort of makes you a bit more, always keen for a fight, always looking for a fight. And that did not really sit with my personality. And I go walk around with a smile on my face and people say, well, what kind of lawyer do I have? It's just smiling in court. He's not going to be able to make a fuss. So anyways, that was the background to why I wanted to leave practice and try out for the bench. And then I remember that just before I started making the application, and the reason I actually wanted to go to the bench is when I was in my service year, I lived with a judge in East State. And so I saw it closely. I was in the kitchen almost. And I saw how the whole process was. I quite liked it. It was a very reserved life. You go to court, you come back, you're indoors, you don't do parties, you don't do, not a lot of social life. And I thought that was quite cool. I thought it suited my personality better. And then obviously in Nigeria, it's a long journey. And I'm sorry, I'm boring you with my stories. But
no, I'm loving it. No, please go on. Actually, I'm actually loving it.
No, because in Nigeria, there's a lot of politics involved in getting to the bench. I didn't really see the prospect. So I thought, okay, maybe I'll do something else. And the only other thing I thought to do was to go into academia. So bear in mind, at this point, I had no master's. And when I was in university, I don't think I ever spoke in class. So I'm one of those students who really never engaged. I mean, I was a good student, but I never really was up front and center. So then I thought, okay, I'll put in for a master's and I'll put in for a PhD. So at that time, I was already thinking master's, PhD. So I have to be clear, because some people just do this because it's, oh, I've got to stay in the country, so I'll apply for the PhD. So this is the background to that discussion. And I remember now very vividly that at the time I was applying for my master's, I was already talking to my PhD supervisor. And I got to his profile and I'd seen all he had done. And I emailed him and I said, look, I really love your profile. I would literally like to do this. And then I put in for the master's. I came over to Sheffield University. Coincidentally, the guy who became my PhD supervisor was my master's research supervisor. So we already struck up a relationship. We grew quite fond of each other. And so from there, obviously finished the master's. He was there to support me. He gave me all the advice I could ever ask for. He pointed me in all the right directions. And then I just thought, right after the master's, I would apply for the PhD. So I literally graduated in January for my master's and started my PhD in February. I had no stop. Literally. In fact, I had my offer letter before I had my final result.
Whoa.
So that was my journey. So I just transitioned very quickly from master's to PhD in the same department with the same supervisor.
But I love that. I love the forward thinking, proactiveness, and planning. That is very important. Now, I've written a book called Mapping Your PhD Journey. And part of what I advise people is, as you're preparing, look at the supervisors, look at the school. So I like that. This is actually very helpful for those that are currently doing their masters or about to do their masters. That way, you maximize that time. Oh, that's actually really good. Oh, wonderful. Okay.
Yeah, and I always say to people who come within my sphere of influence, that before you finish the masters, you've got to start to think, where can I possibly, if you want to do the pitch, of course, where can I possibly apply? What are my advantages? Because obviously I was doing the master's in a Russell Group University. So I was already at a huge advantage being in the department. So I could walk up to the supervisors and say, here's what I want to do. What do you think? And so taking advantage of all those opportunities early on before the master's even got halfway was good, because it helped me save time. Time is of the essence, especially in this country where the policies go up and down, as we've seen recently.
Don't get me started. Don't get me started.
Exactly.
You said something. You said, here's what I want to do. At what point did you know what you want to do? And how did you get to that process? Now, I know your journey. I like that, because your master's sort of fed into it, or maybe I'm just assuming, did it feed into it? No, but that's crafting your proposal. Can you talk us through that part of it?
Yeah. Yes, definitely my master's fed into. In fact, I would say my undergrad fed all the way to my master's and then to my PhD. Right. Because right from my undergrad days, I've always been keen on technology. And I can go back many years with this story, but I won't go that far back. But I've always been very keen on technology. So my undergrad, I explored ICT law in Nigeria. So for my master's, although my master's was commercial law and practice, I looked for the technological aspect of it. So I did my master's research on electronic money, which is digital type stuff. And so when I was finishing that master's thesis, I just thought, what's the next conversation from here? And the next conversation was crypto. And at the time, bear in mind, this was 2016. At the time, crypto was just emerging. So there was not the buzz you hear now about Bitcoin. It was absolutely emerging at the time. And I just thought, if I've done a research thesis on digital money, which is more like credit cards and stuff, then the next discussion naturally is cryptocurrency. Yeah. So I just used that to springboard myself onto the PhD. And luckily for me, I had expertise in the department. Maybe not expertise in terms of technology, but I had expertise in terms of finance. Okay. So those guys were able to help me craft the PhD. In terms of the proposal, obviously, as you know, it's when you're writing a proposal for the first time, it looks very crude. It doesn't read as well as you want it to read. I was very fortunate to have a supervisor who was willing to read unofficially. And so I took advantage of that opportunity. I would always send it to him and he would say, okay, tweak this here, add this there. And then when we got to a stage that was almost ready to submit, I then got involved with the official process. So
Yeah.
I suppose that was my process of getting the proposal ready and submitted.
Oh, that's great. Now, let me just ask this. So, when you thought of crypto and it was new at the time, did you have any kind of trepidation? Like, okay, this is a new field. Will I find data? Well, how's that going to work? And then how did you navigate through that?
I don't think at the time I was even thinking as an academic, because these questions you're asking now, I think about these questions now, especially when I advise the students that I supervise. I always say to them, have you thought about, whether you find sources? At the time, I was more enthusiastic about the topic rather than strategic. I just wanted to know, what is this thing? And how can we use this thing? What would the Lord do? So I had genuine questions that I was driven by, rather than thinking about the academic side of things. So I suppose the way I would respond to that is to say, I had the questions first, and then I found ways around making sure I answered the question. And I remember that when I started the PhD, my supervisor said to me, the subject expert, said to me, there's not a lot to write on in terms of crypto. So why don't you go off and read into economics? And so I spent the whole first year digging into economic literature about money, about finance. And so although there was technically nothing to write on in terms of crypto, I used the first few years or the first year to sort of ground myself on economic thinking. So yes, there may be not enough stuff to write on or not enough stuff to cite academic sources, but you can always be innovative. If you think about the question and the problems innovatively, you can always find a way to bring an academic discussion.
Oh, nice one. I like that. What about your methodology? How did that go?
I mean, in law, our methodology is always straightforward. It's black letter, it's doctrinal. I did consider for a second doing the interviews and the qualitative.
This is science route.
Yeah, but it just didn't. In law we were better off. Well, not better off, but the traditional way we do research in law, obviously, is to do desk research. So you go and find essential, relevant legal resources and legal frameworks and regimes, and then you read those. You read the cases. And then you analyze that critically, and then you have a discussion. So we don't, in law, traditionally don't do all the interviews, surveys, etc. So in terms of methodology, it was quite straightforward. All I had to do was just think about where I would get sources from, what kind of sources I would use, and just how I would interact with that process, rather than, do I want to craft some, technical? No. I didn't do any of that with my PhD. I just went straightforward, did the simple method. And I'll tell you this, actually, I don't think my supervisors ever asked about the methods until 2 or 3 months before I submitted. It wasn't really even a discussion. It was at the end of the thesis that I then thought, okay, I've got to justify what I've done so far with some kind of discussion around methods. Not like I didn't use a method, but I did not articulate the method. So I had to go back at the end and now sort of write up a section about my methods.
Oh no, I like that. And that is important for people to understand how these things can work differently. So yes, these are different approaches. Okay, now let's get to the big one. Funding. Funding.
Funding is the big F. I would like
honestly.
The F word of research. Funding. Funding is a big challenge. Especially when you come from, it depends on your economic background and your social background, of course, but funding is a big issue. It was a big issue for me. Even funding the masters was a huge deal. That's a story for another day. I'll tell you something. My dad, when I applied for my masters, my dad and I had a shared vision that I would do the masters. We didn't quite have the funds. So I remember that at the time he worked in a company in Nigeria, and he then sort of retired, and the government was buying over the company. So what they did is, because they bought over the company, they sold off the company, what they did is they settled all the employees that they retrenched. So my dad was one of those who had to leave the job, and the government had paid him the entire severance pay. Wow. So I was lucky because I had the offer and I had no way to fund it. So I went back and I was working. And then one day he called me up on the phone. We've just been paid our entire severance.
Wow, that's amazing.
And he just said, all of this money I want to invest in your education. So let's start the process. And at that point, I already had my offer. So we just paid the tuition, we arranged the transport and everything, and I left the country. When I was finishing the master's, he said to me, now you finished the master's, you remember this was all my severance pay.
Oh, have you paid him back though? Have you paid him back?
Well, it wasn't a loan. It was an investment. It wasn't.
Where's the return?
It was an investment. Well,
Where's the
obviously,
return?
he invested in me as a person rather than in the. It wasn't like a financial arrangement. But to be fair, and I'll answer that question later.
Okay.
But when I was finishing the master's, he said to me, you know, that was my severance pay, and it's finished. And you know, you've got to figure out what you want to do next. So at the time I was applying for my PhD, I literally had no idea where the money would come from. In fact, at the time, because I'd exhausted my tenancy where I was living, I moved out and I lived with a friend. I was squatting with a family, actually. They gave me a room to live in. So I remember at the time I was thinking about the PhD. I think that I had the mindset that I wouldn't worry about the money. And this is so strange, so I can't recommend it to anybody. But I had the mindset that I wouldn't worry about the money. I would worry about getting the offer first. So I chased after the admission without necessarily thinking about the source of funds. I just chased after the admission. If I didn't even think about scholarship, because I remember thinking, well, scholarship takes a while. You got to, I don't have time for this. You know, I can apply now and get the offer letter. And at the time, the pressure was, you've got to get the offer letter so you can apply for the next visa. So all I was thinking about was the next visa. I wasn't thinking about how I'll pay for PhD, nothing. And then the reality hit a month later, actually. When, you know, a month later, I got my ID card, I got everything, I got the computer, I got a desk. And then a month later, the university emailed me and said, okay, so now that you started your PhD, we need to talk about tuition. And I had I'm serious, I absolutely had no money. At the time, obviously, like I said, I was squatting with someone. So I was being taken care of in terms of feeding and accommodation. So I didn't really have that much of a worry. But I had a side job, and that side job was how I paid for the visa. So when it was time to pay for tuition, I think I had like £200 in my account. I remember going up to the accounts department and just saying to them, I actually have no money, but I've got, and I remember the lady saying to me, have you got anything in your account? Just put it down as a sign of commitment. I remember this distinctly. She said, pay whatever you have, just put it down. And I remember I moved my credit card and I said, I've got £100 here. She said, pay, put it down. So I paid £100. And she said, don't worry, just go. You know, at least you put down commitment. And then a few months later, they emailed me and confidentially, they gave me a payment plan. And so I started to pay for the PhD monthly. Luckily, obviously, when you're in this kind of position, you're doing whatever you can. So I was trying to get whatever job I could get in the university. So I was very lucky. 2 months after I started the PhD, I got an assistant lectureship in a different department, but it was to teach law. And I was quite good at law. So the guy went and I interviewed for the job and he was like, he hired me on the spot. So that was paying me significantly more than the minimum wage. I think it was like £40 per hour or something. It was such a huge blessing that. So that job helped me pay slowly. So every month I would put down £500, £700, 800, whatever I had, I would just go at the end of the month and put it down. And I paid the tuition that way in 12 months, the first year. And then luckily, after I finished the first payment, I then got scholarship. And I got scholarship, but then refunded everything I paid in first year. So back to your question of, did you refund your dad? When I got that huge amount of money, I just said to him, okay, I can give you 10K. So take care some money to, you know, to refund you for the month, nice. The amounts you spent. Yeah. So that was my journey into PhD.
Yeah. Wow. So you got partial funding from the second year. That's
so it wasn't really partial. It was actually full funding.
Okay, but from your second year.
Yes, I had a funding that paid me $30,000 per year, and it was the 3-year funding. Okay. And so in total, I think it was about $100,000. If you convert that to pounds, it would be somewhere around 90-something thousand at the time. So that was enough to at least cater for my tuition. It catered for my tuition, catered for my rent, it catered for my company. Just little things. I mean, as long as I paid the tuition, I had jobs to do. I was working in university. I was working outside the university. I was trying to make ends meet however I could. So it wasn't really partial, but it was partial in the sense that it started in the second year.
Right. Yeah.
As you will know, PhD is usually 3 to 4 years, but the fourth year you don't pay full fees.
Yes.
Remember.
Yes.
So I had second year, third year, and then in fourth year, I had excess money left. So that then refunded for the first year tuition I paid, yeah.
Oh, that's really good. How long did it take you? So if somebody's watching now and they're thinking of applying, and I like the story because oftentimes they wait until they get scholarship, but then you can actually start and you can get as you go along. How long did it take you to get the scholarship? Did you apply? When did you apply? So what are some of the tips you can give somebody watching?
So the scholarship is tricky. It depends on the person who's providing you with the resources. It depends on the funder. My scholarship, the important thing for the university was that you had somebody who had committed to pay. So it didn't really matter that the scholarship did not give me any money when I applied. The important thing was that there was a letter from the funding body saying this person is on scholarship. Because all I had to do was take that letter to the university and say, I'm off, don't ask me for payment anymore, ask them. So, that was all I had to do. In terms of the time frame, let me see if I remember. I think I finished paying my first year tuition around September. And then I think all of the scholarship process probably before January was done. It was pretty much done in a few months because I remember going for the interview and it was a straightforward application process. I went for the interview I went for the exam. A month later, I had the interview. And then a month after that, I got a decision. So it was literally like 2 or 3 months.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah.
Okay, that's a great turnaround time.
The advice, if I may, just to finish off that thought.
Yes, please.
People, oftentimes you hear, and I saw this on the internet recently, people say, well, don't start the PhD if you don't have funding. And I understand where that's coming from because PhD is grueling. And you don't want to be thinking about money whilst you're thinking about, research question, research methods and stuff. While you're going through the motions of the PhD journey, you don't also want to be thinking about tuition, frankly, because it's a huge endeavor. So I understand when people say, make sure you have funding secured. Because if you don't, you're going to have to go through so much on top of the PhD journey. Now, obviously, some people can do that because they've got the resilience and some people have the support system to help them to achieve that. So you have to assess, my advice is you have to assess your strengths and the support system that you've got and your personality and your resolve. It's a very individual thing. I don't think there is an answer that fits every single person for that question. You've got to assess yourself. For me, I knew that I was going to do it however, and I would say an element of faith. I probably have this attitude. Some people say to me that I have the attitude of putting my head in the sand. And when I have a problem, I eye the problem and I say, okay, I'll see you later. And I go on with my life until that problem becomes something that is right in front. So in a way, that attitude helped me because I just said, PhD, funding, fine. Apply for the PhD, start the PhD, go for classes, behave as though everything is okay. And then, when the time's right, something will happen. And that has always been sort of the core belief is just keep going. And I don't know how much I can bring faith into the discussion, but the faith that I had, just knowing that, I trust that God will do it for me.
Yeah.
And I'm just going to keep plowing and I'm going to keep applying for stuff. And I applied for everything I could apply for, job-wise, anything I could apply for. I met anybody I could meet. I entered these networks and departments. I was doing reviews for conferences. I was just trying to engage as much as I could. Yeah. And I think that then opened doors. First, the university saw me the department saw me as a safe pair of hands. So whenever there was something up, someone would call me, Kingsley, do you want to do this? And so again, it's an individual question. Yeah. If you really want to do the PhD, my advice is, or my advice would be, if you really want to do the PhD, don't think so much about the hurdles. Because if you focus your attention on those hurdles, You will not, your attention, and I used to say this, you cannot split your attention. You can either focus on one thing or you focus on another thing. You can't be focusing on two things. So the moment you turn your attention from the PhD to the funding problem, it'll become bigger.
Yeah.
Yeah. So my approach was I'll keep my eye on the target and I'll stumble as I stumble along and I'll figure it out.
No,
Which I
I actually like that. And I like that you said it's very individual because it's important. I know we've had this conversation in the wider group where we talked about the practical, the pragmatic. And the truth is there is a dimension of faith. I'm not afraid to bring in, there is a dimension of faith. Even if you have funding, there is faith that that funding will stay and nothing would happen, in the course of the journey or just something. So I like that it's important and it is encouraging, which is why we're doing this series to show people possibilities, to tell them that you can plan. If you really want to do this, the more you focus on that problem, the fun actually gets bigger and then it suffocates you and then you can't move. But we're not saying ignore it. We're saying pay attention to your goal, your focus. And one thing you said was that you worked hard. You applied for things. Hard work pays. You can't just sit down and then you say, no, Kingley, Genevieve said, it's going to come. No, you need to work. Okay.
And just to cap that, you've got to figure out what you need.
Yeah.
For me personally, I had to say to myself, here are a few things I'm not doing well. Here are a few aspects of my personality that need to improve. Here are some things I can't deal with, or here are some things I have no control over, and I'm just going to give up on those ones. So you've got to be very intentional. I wasn't, and I say this, when I started the PhD, I'd never taught before. I'd never stood in front of it. I was still a very shy person. I never really liked to take public attention or whatever. And I just remember saying to myself, I've got to learn, And when I started applying for GTA positions, I remember thinking to myself, how am I going to teach law to white kids? This is their country, this is their legal system. But I had to teach myself stuff. So there's an element of which you have to just say to yourself, I've got to go and learn stuff and improve myself.
Absolutely.
Because some of those opportunities are on the other side of that personal development. So, and you have to be very intentional. Some people just say, well, I can't do that and I can't do this because you find reasons why you don't want to go forward, rather than say, okay, here's the impediment, here's what I can do to fix it. And there's some impediments you can't, just let it go. Can't deal, I can't control that. So, okay, I'll try and make do without,
Yeah.
And I think, if I may, one more thing is, there are no two journeys that are alike. And there are no two people that have the same access. So one thing I had to learn very early was just to stop comparing myself with other people. Because, when you're a PhD student first year, you're among all these people with funding and with money and from this one is very brilliant, that one comes from a big wealthy background, and you end up almost thinking, am I even in the right place? Like, I'm trying to do this PhD and everybody around me is super intelligent or super wealthy or super connected. And you just keep thinking, is this the right choice? But the important thing to say is never to compare. Your journey is your journey. Your past is your past. Your present is your present. You've got to make the journey that suits that, rather than saying, well, the other person is applying for that scholarship and they've got it, so I've got to apply for that scholarship because I will get it too. Doesn't always work,
Preach, come on. Hey, I love it.
It was going to be a ministration per session.
You understand? Do you get yes? No, that is really, really important. Thank you for that, because people need to know that the journeys are different, but then hey, keep at it, focus. Okay, now somebody watching you, what will be some advice now? And we're going to do a part 2 because I want us to spend time talking about supervision. That one, year 1, year 2, year 3, the different progressions that occurred. But what will be your advice to somebody that studied law in Nigeria or in a different country, and that is thinking of doing it here. Maybe they've done their masters, or maybe they're even about to. So what would you tell them now about the process, the changes that are occurring in the system now, like, heartbreaking as it is, but what would you say to them?
What I would say, and I say this very often actually, because I've got some networks in Nigeria, law students and young lawyers who often ask me to come and speak to them. And what I say to them all the time is that law is a very old industry. And it used to be very exclusive. There were only certain people from certain backgrounds who were allowed to practice law. So when you come into that discussion, knowing how old this profession is, you've got to think about how to create your niche, or to create space for yourself. So what I always say to people, especially young people, is think about the future today, future of the profession. Think about the kinds of questions that would need answering tomorrow. Because some of the questions we have, some of the answers we have now were resolved 100 years plus ago by some young people. Questions about jurisdiction, questions about how to craft law for businesses that involved shipping over the sea. All of these established legal industries or sectors were created 100 plus years ago by young people. So I always say to young people, you've got to think about where the world is going and start to think about the kinds of questions you can ask now that would answer the problems of tomorrow. Because law is already very saturated. If you come in and you want to do a discussion around a topic that's already saturated, you're going to be competing with a lot of people with a lot of institutional support. Someone who Oxford is giving money to go and study a program, you can compete, but that person is going to have access to places that you're not going to have access to, or someone who is studying in Harvard. So you've got to think about what are the kinds of problems that I can touch on now that will still be useful tomorrow and in a few years. And obviously the easy one, is technology. And this was my route. So technology, things like artificial intelligence, crypto, whatever you can think of now that there's not quite enough legal answers. I would say start to think about how you can take some of those problems and proffer legal solutions to, or at least investigate for the future. And that's how you stay relevant. So my advice would be for anybody who's considering, even if it's a traditional area like commercial law or like contract or like wills, whatever, there are innovative questions you can ask. My PhD was on money. There's no institution as old as money, if you think about the way money has evolved. But still, I had to figure out something new is happening in money. And I've got to try and provide a legal discussion around that thing. So my advice to law students and to people considering law students or lawyers considering a PhD is think about the new ways you can question old ideas. Yeah. And then create a research around that and you'll be fine. Yeah.
Okay. I like that. Yeah. You'll be fine. In fact, let's take that to the bank, put that on a t-shirt.
Yeah, you'll be fine because as you know, it's your research will open doors for you.
Sure.
Your research will open access for you to places where you ordinarily don't think you can enter. It's the research, it's not you. I mean, yes, it's an element of you, but it's more the research. it's more the research. If you do something interesting, people will want to listen. And when people want to listen to you, they won't mind where you're from. They won't care where where you did your undergrad. Or in fact, I found some people won't even care how you graduated.
Yeah.
Whether you had a first class or second class. As long as you're asking an important question, doors will open and people will sit and listen. So, and that thinking actually holds back a lot of people because they keep thinking, well, I didn't make a first class, or I didn't make a 2-1, or I failed some courses. I teach. When I started my PhD, I started teaching contract law. And the most ironic thing is that my contract law days in university, I actually failed it. Well, I don't think I failed it. but they couldn't find my script. So I had to do it, Nigerian. I just didn't want to fight anybody. I was like, okay, I'll rewrite it. It's fine. But I started to teach contract law, and I thought, how funny.
Wow.
So it doesn't really matter where you're coming from. If you are doing what you need to do, that will open doors. That's my advice.
I like that. And, I like this thing that says that all things do work together. The fact that you had to do it twice made you learn it, which prepared you to teach it. So failure is how we conceptualize failure. We see it as another opportunity to learn, because you, like, Dr. Kingley now, might have to teach it somewhere else. So that is your opportunity to learn it and imbibe it. So wow, that is really interesting. Now, where are we going? So talk to me about the next 5-10 years, since is the bench still part of the picture now, or is it now?
No, I don't think that the bench is still part of the picture. Except the bench here, and I actually have looked at it, and I've considered whether I could become a magistrate here. And that's something I probably will keep thinking about. The next few years, I think I'm going to hang on in academia for a bit. And I've always seen my journey into academia as a step. I've always seen it as a step. I'm not exactly clear where it is going, but I know that it is a step to acquire something that I need for the next phase. Right. So if you ask me if it's me planning, my plan would be stay here for a few years, do the academic thing, teach, publish as much as I can, and then step into consulting, and then step out back into corporate legal practice. That would be my journey, I would think. For now, I just want to stay in academia, grow as a person, not just in terms of publication, but also my personal growth, learn to speak in places that, I've never spoken in. The other day, and this is funny, the other day, I finished a lecture. I had a fantastic lecture. I included videos, and I could see their eyes. They're all like, "Oh, this is interesting," and I can remember stepping back and just saying, "Wow, I'm doing this in a hall full of students, 200 plus." And the student came to me and said, "Do you ever get nervous?" And I'm sure he said that because he just thought I was just gliding through this. He probably thought I was just doing it naturally. And I said, yes, of course I get nervous. And I suppose the reason I've said that is, for me, this is the growth process. This is my process, that I can stand in front of those rooms and speak and teach, not just speak, because you can speak and not teach, and teach, and then go into those small groups, those sessions we have, those workshops, and also teach and pass and make impact. Yeah. And I think that is the thing I need for the next journey. I'm not sure what that journey is, but it will involve teaching, it will involve speaking, it will involve crafting people, I think. So we'll see. Maybe check back in 10 years.
I know, no, that's really great. And yes, we are so excited. Thank you for sharing that. It is very powerful, when you step back and look at growth, how far, and what you're doing, teaching, shaping the lives and future of people. It's something that, even though some people do come back to say thank you, but it's very satisfying knowing that we are part of people's journey. So thank you so much. And also thank you for sharing today.
Oh, no, it's okay. It's okay. I thank you for having me. And actually, since we started these discussions, I've really enjoyed it. So thank you for the opportunity to also give me your platform to share the story. I do think I have a book in me that I haven't decided to put together yet, but I know it's there. And when it's ready, once all the stories are in, I can put it together. But I think it's an important story to tell, because some people just need lifting, and some people don't. And here's the thing, some people don't really have anyone to lift them. It's not always about money. It's not always about, family connections. Some people just need something to lift them up. So if this helps for those who are listening and watching, I'm more than honored to continue to share.
Oh, I'm sure it does. And for those listening, please tell us. I'm sure. Please put it in the chat, and we'll drop your LinkedIn. For those that would contact you, especially the lawyers that are like, "Oh, I love this. I want to do something similar." And so thank you so much. We'll be back with part 2, part 3, part 4, because we're still going to talk about these supervisor. But please do follow us on Instagram, on LinkedIn. Watch out for my new book that is coming out. It's Mapping Your PhD Journey. Yeah, so it's an ebook, but it's just to show you all that it happens to prepare you. And I give the analogy there that think of the underground map. When you're going on the journey, you have a map, the different destination stops and all that. It's something that would help you think. So we look out for that. But thank you, Dr. Kingsley, for your time. And we'll be back with some more. Thank you.